If you walk into literally any bookstore today or scroll through your phone, you are instantly bombarded by the exact same message. Build yourself up.
Right. It's everywhere.
Yeah, the entire self-help and personal growth industry is built on this very additive premise. You need to find your voice, establish your boundaries, cultivate your personal brand.
You're supposed to be constructing your I, right?
Yeah.
Making it as loudly and powerfully defined as possible.
Exactly. The ultimate goal of modern life is basically building a towering monument to yourself, which makes it incredibly jarring when you suddenly encounter a worldview that looks at that towering monument of the I and says, hand me a sledgehammer.
Yeah, complete paradigm shift.
So welcome to today's deep dive. We're doing something a bit different today for you guys. We are exploring a text that flips our modern obsession with the ego completely upside down.
It really does.
We're looking at a highly specific, profoundly introspective spiritual text. It's called Prayer 3, delivered by Reverend Sun Myung Moon, taken from the excerpts of The Restoration of Original Shimjung and Divine Value.
And it is a dense, emotionally raw piece of source material. It doesn't read like a standard theological essay at all.
No, not at all.
It's more of an active, real-time wrestling match with the human condition.
Right. And just to set the ground rules for you listening today, because we are diving into a text that is inherently religious and theological, our goal here is strictly to explore and unpack the philosophical framework impartially.
We're acting as guides, really.
Exactly. We are not endorsing or taking a stance on the religious viewpoints. We're just here to help you understand the concepts within the original source material. We want to map out the architecture of these ideas.
And the architecture here is, it's fascinating. The battle lines in this text are drawn in the very first sentence.
Yeah, it sets up this core tension right away, this battle between the human ego, the I, and a much deeper spiritual state called Shimjung.
The prayer literally opens with this desperate desire to, quote, take apart once again the thing in myself that makes me insist on I.
Which is such an intense way to start. It describes a mind that just languishes, floating aimlessly without a goal.
And struggling to see the difference between the I of the past and the I of today, just spinning its wheels.
Right. And reading that, my first thought was just, why?
Yeah, it goes against everything we're taught.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the instinct for self-preservation, lifting up your own value, that's biologically hardwired into us. It keeps us alive. Why does this prayer view that basic human instinct as something that actively needs to be dismantled?
Well, what's fascinating here is how it frames that very self-preservation. Within the logic of this text, what we call self-preservation is actually spiritual isolation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a universal struggle against self-centeredness. Think about the sheer exhaustion of always having to assert your own value. The text argues that by constantly centering the I, you're trapped in a very small, very lonely loop.
I like to think of it like a radio station. The human insistence on I is this really loud, staticky radio station that just drowns out the quieter, deeper frequency of Shimjung.
That is a perfect analogy. As long as that loud broadcaster is dominating the airwaves, you cannot tune into Shimjung.
And we should define that, because Shimjung is the absolute linchpin of this entire text.
It really is. And translating it perfectly into English is notoriously difficult. But the sources frame it as something much heavier than just heart or feeling.
Right. It's not just, oh, I have good feelings today.
Exactly. Emotion is too shallow of a word for it. In this framework, Shimjung is the absolute epicenter of your intention, the deepest core motivation of a being.
So if the ego is blocking that, what's the solution? A minor adjustment.
Not at all. The text calls for what it literally terms a Shimjung revolution.
A revolution.
Yeah, a deep internal shift to recenter the heart away from the ego so the mind doesn't forget its true position.
The word revolution is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. I mean, revolutions are usually violent overthrows of ruling regimes.
Precisely. And the ruling regime of your life right now is your wandering mind and your ego.
So you have to forcefully depose the ego from the center of your being to discover your divine value.
That's the argument, yes.
Okay, so once the ego is identified as the problem, the usurper, the text moves to illustrate what true alignment actually looks like.
And it uses the historical example of Jesus to draw a really sharp line in the sand.
Right. It states that Jesus' words will not change, quote, even one iota.
But it uses that to make a fascinating critique. It points out that the goal of Jesus' words was not merely to create people who simply like those words.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because there is a massive difference between being a fan of a philosophy versus actually embodying it.
Oh, absolutely. Being a fan is easy.
Yeah. You can quote a philosopher on social media, buy the merch, intellectually agree with a concept while sipping your coffee, but the text says intellectual agreement is not enough.
The goal was to create people who would unite with Jesus' Shimjung and body.
Unite with his Shimjung ND body, total embodiment.
Yes, demanding total synchronization. Your deepest core motivation and your physical actions have to be in absolute lockstep.
But I have to push back on this premise a little bit.
Go for it.
Given that the text just described the human mind as aimless and wandering, is it practically possible to perfectly align both your mind and body with the Shimjung of the historical figure? I mean, I want to be a good person, but my body also wants to hit snooze on my alarm clock 4 times every morning.
We are creatures of intense friction, for sure.
Exactly.
And the text is fully aware of that friction. It expresses immense grief over humanity, wandering to find its lost original value, losing the position of having the divine reside within.
So it acknowledges how exhausted we are by this.
It does, but it also offers a vision of the antidote, a state it calls the purposed garden.
A purposed garden, so something intentionally cultivated, not just wild.
Right. This garden is a state where Shimjung is fully invested and the mind and body are finally happily harmonized.
Happily harmonized. I like the sound of that.
That friction you mentioned, the decision fatigue, the inner battles, all of that comes from the mind and body wanting different things. The text frames our current state as a laborious wandering, searching for this exact lost harmony.
Okay, so finding that purposed garden and achieving perfect harmony sounds great, but getting there requires a severe, almost painful level of loyalty and spiritual surrender.
The language shifts dramatically in this section. It becomes very visceral.
Yeah, it illustrates this through vivid imagery. The prayer asks for unchanging loyalty, comparing it to the unchanging pine and bamboo.
Which rise up enough to move the entire world.
And the pine is evergreen, it survives winter. Bamboo is known for its tensile strength. It bends in a hurricane but doesn't snap.
But look at what the speaker offers up alongside that resilience. They bring a scarred body.
And an unmanageable mind which wanders as if on the street. That line is brilliant.
It's a profound admission of vulnerability.
Think about modern humanity's struggle with constant distraction. Your mind wandering the street, looking in shop windows, getting bumped into by strangers, totally lost.
You're bringing your absolute worst, most scattered self to the altar.
And then comes the crucial part. The prayer asks the divine to fix the body and mind. But regarding Shimjung, it says, restore the bond with Father by breaking it if necessary.
Breaking it.
Asking the divine to break your Shimjung if it isn't right sounds incredibly severe. It's essentially asking for a spiritual demolition in order to rebuild the house.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to contextualize this severity.
Okay, how so?
Within the logic of this prayer, nothing belongs to the individual. The text says, we have given it all to you.
So you've surrendered the property rights to your own soul.
Precisely. If you still claim ownership of your ego, then having your core broken sounds like a punishment. But the breaking is framed not as violence, but as a necessary purification process.
Like if the foundation of a house is totally rotten, you can't fix it by repainting the walls.
Exactly. You have to bring in the sledgehammer, shatter the rotten foundation, and pour a new one. It's meant to return a scarred, broken person to their original divine position.
Okay, that makes sense. So having broken down the individual ego and surrendered completely, the text finally reveals the structural hierarchy of existence.
It zooms out from the solitary individual to a much wider collective community.
Right. It lays out a very specific hierarchy. Before the body comes the mind. Before the mind comes Shimjung. And before Shimjung, we must attend the heavenly moral laws.
It systematizes the theology very cleanly right there.
So what does this all mean? We have the specific order of operations, moral laws, then Shimjung, then mind, then body.
Yeah.
It's structured almost like a corporate org chart, but for the soul, where the physical body is at the very bottom of the chain of command.
That's a really great way to look at it. This hierarchy perfectly encapsulates the text's worldview. The physical is entirely subordinate to the emotional and spiritual core.
Right. The body doesn't get to make the big decisions.
Not at all. The heavenly moral laws are the objective truths at the top. Shimjung internalizes those truths. The mind takes direction from Shimjung, and the body simply executes.
So when the ego is in charge, the org chart is completely upside down.
Exactly. And this raises an important question regarding how collective this journey actually is.
Because the prayer shifts outward here, doesn't it?
It does. It's a fascinating shift. It goes from this deeply internal, agonizing personal prayer to a communal plea.
Yeah, it asks the divine to be with lonely people kneeling in prayer in all regions of South Korea.
And it asks for grace for members who shed tears longing for this position.
It even mentions those who are tied up by their situations, people who physically cannot move according to their spiritual will.
It recognizes the universal struggle. You aren't the only one trying to demolish the ego.
And it expands even further. It ends by asking for the blessing of spirit men gathering with good men under a common domain of Shimjung.
Merging the physical world and the spiritual realm into one unified ecosystem.
So once you smash your own individual ego, you realize you're part of this massive collective, all trying to align with the same moral laws.
You're never just doing this in a vacuum.
Wow. Okay, so let's briefly recap the journey of this deep dive for you listening. We started in the messy reality of the human ego, looking at the need to dismantle the I.
Right, acknowledging the wandering, aimless mind.
Then we move through the intense, unwavering loyalty required the pine and bamboo surrendering completely.
Even being willing to have your core Shimjung broken and purified.
And finally, we arrived at the ultimate hierarchy, where heavenly moral laws and Shimjung rule over the mind and body, connecting us to a vast spiritual community.
It's a profound structural map of the soul.
It really is. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something to explore on your own that builds on this source material.
Okay, let's hear it.
If the ultimate goal outlined here is the complete harmonization of mind and body, through Shimjung essentially dissolving the selfish ego into a unified divine collective, what happens to human individuality?
Oh, that's a deep question.
Right. Does achieving true spiritual unity require the total erasure of our unique, messy human quirks?
Or does it transform them?
Exactly. Does a Shimjung revolution somehow refine those individual traits into something else entirely? When we enter that purposed garden, are we a sea of identical beings, or are we perfectly harmonized, unique individuals?
That's definitely something to chew on.
Yeah, something to think about the next time you find your mind wandering on the street. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.